Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing the nonverbal communication of John and Patsy Ramsey in regards to the case of the death of JonBenét Ramsey, their daughter. This is not the first video that I have done on this case. I have done quite a few other ones here. This one is going to be focused more around the conflicts and the evidence, and then looking at some more of the interview footage from earlier on in the case timeline. More on that in just a second. Let's go ahead and roll the intro first. Okay, so as I mentioned, here's a little bit of a backstory and some of the difficulties around the case. On the morning after Christmas in 1996, Patsy Ramsey called 911 in Boulder, Colorado, frantic about a ransom note saying her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, had been kidnapped. Police arrived to a confusing scene. A 2.5-page handwritten ransom note had been left on the stairs demanding an oddly specific sum of $118,000. Yet, tragically, JonBenét was soon found dead in the family's basement, her body bound with rope and duct tape over her mouth. An autopsy later revealed she had been strangled and struck on the head, suffering a skull fracture, and showed signs of possible sexual assault. In the house that night, there were only JonBenét's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, and her 9-year-old brother, Burke. In the nearly 29 years since, this high-profile murder case remains unsolved, tangled in conflicting evidence and competing narratives that have baffled both the public and seasoned investigators. Here's a summary of the primary theories. Number 1 is the intruder theory. One major line of speculation argues that an unknown intruder broke into the Ramsey home and killed JonBenét. Supporters of this theory point to puzzling evidence that doesn't seem to come from the family. For instance, unidentified DNA and hair. Forensic tests found male DNA under JonBenét's fingernails and in her underwear that matched no one in the Ramsey family. An unfamiliar Caucasian hair was also discovered on her body's blanket. Years later, in 2008, new touch DNA testing on JonBenét's clothing again found a male genetic profile, leading the district attorney to conclude that it belonged to an unrelated stranger and to formally clear the Ramseys of suspicion despite the nuanced reliability of touch DNA results. More evidence for the possibility of an intruder is signs of forced entry. Investigators eventually noted a basement window left open with a broken pane and disturbed debris surrounding it, suggesting that someone could have climbed in. A high-tech brand boot print was also found near JonBenét's body, and neither the Ramseys nor their friends owned that type of shoe. These clues hint at a possible intruder's presence at the basement that night. Yet more evidence towards that is the method and weaponry used. JonBenét had been found with an improvised garrote fashioned from a broken paintbrush and a cord. The knots were sophisticated slip knots, bondage techniques that the Ramseys had no known expertise in. Moreover, part of the paintbrush used in the killing was missing from the home itself, and the duct tape on her mouth was not able to be traced back to the Ramseys' supplies. Some investigators also believe 2 small marks on JonBenét's body indicate a stun gun was used to subdue her, a device that the Ramseys didn't own. Together, these details paint a heinous assault by a stealthy outsider, a predator who snuck in, restrained and sexually assaulted a child, and murdered her before slipping away unseen. Proponents of the intruder theory often cite veteran homicide detective Lou Smith, who came out of retirement to assist in the case. Smith famously concluded that there are only 2 possible solutions to this crime. Either someone in the Ramsey household did it, or an intruder did it. And he firmly believed that the evidence pointed to an intruder rather than within the household itself. Indeed, the forensic evidence from the scene, the DNA, prints, or hairs, did not seem to tie back to the family whatsoever. Instead, it hints at an unknown assailant. In line with this angle, in 2006, a school teacher in Thailand falsely confessed to the killing, claiming an intruder role. Although his story turned out to be bogus, it also underscored how plausible an outside killer narrative seemed to many who were viewing. To this day, the intruder theory remains a compelling narrative, one of a mystery attacker who left behind tantalizing clues but ultimately vanished, keeping JonBenét's real killer a step beyond the reach of justice. Another of the primary theories is that the family was involved. Equally prominent and fiercely debated is the theory that someone within the house was responsible for JonBenét's death, with a subsequent cover-up staged to mislead investigators. Early on, authorities could not ignore that in most child homicides, the family is likely involved, and the Ramseys' behavior and evidence in this case raised some difficult questions. Over the years, several variations of a family involvement scenario have been proposed. One of those is a staged kidnapping scene. Investigators found it odd that the ransom note was written using Patsy's own notepad and pen from inside the house. The note was unusually long, almost 3 pages, handwritten, and referenced movie lines and dollar amounts closely matching John Ramsey's recent work bonus. Police and FBI experts felt that this lengthy ransom note was highly atypical for a real kidnapping and looked more like a deliberate fabrication. Former police chief Mark Beckner later revealed that authorities believe that the note was written after JonBenét was killed as a part of a murder staged to look like a botched kidnapping. Handwriting analysis conclusively ruled out John Ramsey as the author, but the results were seen as inconclusive for Patsy. This fueled suspicions that Patsy herself may have penned the note to cover up a tragedy within the home. There did seem to be some physical evidence pointing to the Ramseys. Despite signs of an intruder, there were also troubling clues implicating the family. For example, laboratory tests found fibers on the sticky side of the duct tape used on JonBenét's mouth that were consistent with the red jacket that Patsy Ramsey had worn that Christmas night. Investigators also discovered that the garrote's handle was actually a piece of one of Patsy's paintbrushes taken from her art supplies in the house. And although John Ramsey said he broke a basement window himself on a prior occasion, police initially saw no clear evidence of forced entry at the home. Earlier reports about no footprints in the snow added to those doubts, although it was later shown that the yard had patches of clear walkway, so footprints seemed a little bit more negligible. All of these details suggested the crime scene might have been orchestrated from within. There were some behavioral red flags along with this. Critics of the Ramseys' innocence point to their actions in the immediate aftermath. The morning of the 26th, before JonBenét's body was found, the Ramseys invited friends and a minister to their house, resulting in multiple people roaming throughout the potential crime scene areas. John Ramsey also carried and moved his daughter's body upon discovering her, which could have been seen as a natural paternal impulse. However, it also disturbed the scene before police could fully examine it. Burke Ramsey, who was a child at the time, was also said to be asleep during the chaos. However, an enhanced audit of the 911 call audio reportedly caught Burke's faint voice in the background asking, "What did you find?"
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was this? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's gone. Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says FBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. I'm sending an officer over, okay? Please. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out and she's right here. Oh my God, please. Okay, girl. There's somebody. I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath, please. Okay? Hurry. Patsy.
This contradicted the parents' account that he never woke up, raising questions about what exactly the family did know. The Ramseys' cooperation with authorities was mixed. They provided hair, blood, and handwriting samples and spoke to the police in the first days of the investigation, but then hired attorneys and declined formal interviews for months as suspicion around them grew. To some investigators, especially lead detective Steve Thomas, the circumstances hinted at a grim possibility that JonBenét's death was an inside job, perhaps a tragic accident or a rage incident that was then covered up overnight with a fake ransom note and staged crime scene. Thomas theorized that Patsy, finding JonBenét had wet her bed, might have lost her temper and accidentally dealt a fatal head blow, and then, in panic, staged a kidnapping scene, a theory the Ramseys obviously vehemently deny. At this point, no family member has been charged, and in 2008, the Ramseys, including Burke, were formally exonerated by the Boulder District Attorney based on DNA evidence pointing to an outside suspect. However, even before that exoneration, a grand jury in 1999 saw enough evidence to indict John and Patsy Ramsey not for murder, but for child abuse resulting in death and as accessories, essentially alleging they facilitated or covered up a crime against JonBenét. Intriguingly, that indictment did not name any outside intruder, implying that the grand jurors believed that someone in the family had committed the fatal act and that the parents had concealed it. The district attorney at the time disagreed that the case was strong enough to prove in court and declined to sign the indictment, leaving the charges sealed and the public told that no indictments were issued. This behind closed doors drama revealed years later perfectly encapsulates the split narratives. Even the grand jury was divided between an unprovable hunch of a family guilt and the DA's stance of reasonable doubt. The family involvement theories thus persist in the public mind, backed by select pieces of evidence and suspicious circumstances that for many remain hard to reconcile with the idea of an unknown intruder. To add to the confusion of this case, there was evidence handling issues and confounding clues. One reason this case remains so confusing is the flawed handling of the crime scene and evidence from the very start. The Boulder police, unaccustomed to such a complex homicide, made missteps that now haunt the investigation to its core. Initial officers did not secure the Ramsey home properly, allowing friends and acquaintances to wander through the house that morning, likely in an attempt to comfort the Ramseys, but inadvertently contaminating potential evidence. Key forensic precautions were missed. For instance, John Ramsey was permitted to search the house, and he carried his daughter's body upstairs upon finding her, pulling off the tape and loosening the cords in desperate attempts to revive her. Crucial hours passed before the house was fully cordoned as a crime scene. Former Chief Beckner later candidly admitted that officers should have separated and interviewed John and Patsy immediately on day one, but they did not. By the time the thorough searches and interviews happened, memories had already started to fade, and the scene was largely compromised. These early errors meant that almost every piece of evidence has a question mark next to it. For example, one detective's report initially said that there were no footprints in the fresh snow outside, bolstering the theory that no intruder could have fled the house or entered it, but photographs later showed that the areas around the doors were actually pretty clear of snow, meaning that an intruder could have easily come in and gone without leaving any tracks. Many wonder if an unknown assailant slipped in through the broken window, or if the window was broken long before and the intruder theory was just staged. Likewise, fibers and hairs can transfer innocently or even be planted. DNA can originate from a killer, or it can originate from a casual contact. The contradictory nature of the evidence has allowed both the intruder camp and the family did it camp to kind of cherry pick facts supporting their versions. Almost every clue has a counterpoint. The garrote was elaborate, intruder-like, but was made of items from within the house. The ransom note screamed staging by an insider, yet it's so bizarre that it's hard to imagine a parent crafting it under pressure. Investigators have been pulled in two different directions, and some experts conclude that the crime scene chaos and investigative slip-ups might have permanently obscured the truth. As one analysis lamented, the case may have been botched so thoroughly that it might never be solved. This recognition has pushed authorities in later years to double down on forensic advancements, hoping science might succeed where early detective work failed. There are also some controversies around the DNA. DNA was supposed to be the key that unlocked this mystery, and it still might be, but so far it has only added confusion to the controversy. In the late 1990s, forensic labs found trace amounts of unidentified male DNA in JonBenét's underwear and under her nails. Because it didn't match anybody in the Ramsey family or their family friends, this was seen as a strong sign of an outside perpetrator. However, the samples were very small and so degraded, yielding only partial profiles. For years, the DNA angle lay mostly dormant. It wasn't enough to definitively point to any one person, but it also didn't implicate the family. Then, in 2008, District Attorney Mary Lacey took a dramatic step. She announced that more advanced DNA tests had identified the same unknown male's touch DNA on JonBenét's long johns or pants, and that no innocent explanation could account for its presence. Lacey publicly exonerated John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey, apologizing to them in a bold letter and declaring the mystery DNA likely belonged to the killer. This exoneration was highly controversial. Seasoned prosecutors and detectives criticized Lacey for clearing the family based on DNA alone, especially without identifying the actual source of that DNA. In the years since, independent experts have scrutinized those results. It turns out the touch DNA might have originated from something as mundane as manufacturing or packaging, for example, from factory workers handling the clothing rather than from the murderer. In other words, the genetic material could be a red herring unrelated to the crime completely. A joint investigation by a local newspaper and 9 News in 2016 reported that the mixture of DNA on JonBenét's clothing potentially came from multiple people, not just a single unknown man, calling into question how definitive Lacey's conclusion really could have been. The Boulder police themselves were reportedly furious at the 2008 exoneration, feeling it was premature and not backed by a solid case. The DNA in this case has been a double-edged sword. It suggests an answer, but it hasn't definitively solved anything. Even today, it's a point of debate. The Ramsey family and many supporters still trust that modern DNA technology, for instance, like genealogical DNA databases that have cracked other cold cases, will eventually identify JonBenét's killer by that lingering genetic trace. Skeptics countered that unless the DNA truly came from the culprit, chasing it could mislead investigators. No match to the mystery DNA has ever been found in any criminal databases, and so far, it has not directly led to any arrests. The one thing that everyone agrees on is that we must preserve whatever genetic evidence that does exist. Authorities have indeed safeguarded these samples for over decades, and they continue to test and retest as DNA sequencing methods improve. In effect, DNA is a silent witness in this case, one that could either be a smoking gun of an intruder's identity or just another enigma in a case full of false leads. And that brings us to where the case is today in 2025. After nearly 3 decades, the JonBenét Ramsey case remains an open investigation, a puzzle neither forgotten nor solved. Officially, no one has ever been charged with the crime, and the Boulder Police Department maintains that they continue to follow up on new leads. In 2022 to 2023, hoping for a breakthrough, the department convened a special cold case review panel of seasoned detectives, forensic scientists, and FBI experts to re-examine the entire case file with fresh eyes. This team spent over a year sifting through over 1,000 pieces of evidence and 21,000 tips, digitizing mountains of documents and recommending next steps. Although their specific findings remain confidential, officials have committed to pursuing the new recommendations, including the latest DNA testing methods as they emerge. The hope is that tools like genetic genealogy, which have solved notorious cold cases in the past by identifying killers through familial DNA, might finally be applied here to crack the code of the unknown DNA profile. Public interest in the case is undimmed. JonBenét's father, now in his 80s, continues to speak out, pushing for more aggressive use of technology to find his daughter's killer, and occasionally criticizing the early investigation's missteps. Documentaries, books, and investigative reports regularly revisit the evidence, each with their own angle, keeping the debate alive on whether the truth points to perhaps a cover-up or an intruder. Yet, for all the media spotlights, no definitive answer has emerged. As of 2025, the consensus, as frustrating as it is, remains that the case is stuck in a stalemate of evidence. There is powerful information supporting both major theories, but also significant holes and reasonable doubt in each. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey thus endures as an American true crime enigma, a case with fame and infamy in equal measure, but no clear resolution. In summary, the evidence surrounding JonBenét's death is so conflicting that it has prevented a clear conclusion for literal decades. Was it a calculated inside job or the work of a cunning outside intruder? Investigators, past and present, still grapple with that very question, hindered by evidence that points in divergent directions. All major angles, the intruder theory, the family involvement theories, the DNA twists, and the investigative fumbles have merit and complications in equal measure. And so, the case stands at an agonizing impasse. JonBenét's killer has never been identified, and the file remains open in Boulder. The latest efforts give a glimmer of hope that science or a fresh tip could one day tip the balance and reveal the truth. Until then, we are just left with questions to which we cannot yet find the answers. All we can do is to continue to hope and put time, energy, and resources towards finding a resolution and closure. In today's video, I'm going to be analyzing an interview that Denver, Colorado's 9 News orchestrated with John and Patsy. We will attempt to attune to variations from their nonverbal baselines, revealing microexpressions, inconsistent verbal patterns, narrative conflicts, and more to understand the psychology behind their statements and hopefully gain a firmer grasp on what has actually occurred. As a final reminder, this analysis is intended for only education and entertainment purposes. Everything I say here is simply my opinion based on my experience and education and should not be used in any way as legal or professional evidence. With the history and disclaimers out of the way, let's go ahead and begin the analysis.
Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, let's revisit what Governor Bill said on national television this morning. He said that you were hiding behind your public relations people, your attorneys, and now you were hiding.
So this initial question that's in here does not have too much that goes with the case itself, but it has some emotional responses that help us get an understanding to how John and Patsy behaved throughout this interview. So as the interviewer is saying, you're hiding behind, you're being accused of hiding behind these attorneys and these various things, you see a little bit of tension start to come into the corner of John's nose, which is fascinating, and it's very subtle, and that would be an indicator of possible disgust in there. When you see that activity coming in there, it can indicate disgust, which does make sense contextually. But again, it's very light, and there's not too much that's gone around that, but we're already seeing they do have the ability to emote in this specific interview. They are willing to do so. It's not like they're trying to mask that too overtly, so let's continue to see how that plays out.
We're hiding behind easy journalism. He specifically said, why hadn't you talked with Peter Jennings and Tom Brokaw? Your response, Mrs. Ramsey.
Okay, that was a lot that went across John's face, which is fascinating. In prior interviews and even the videos that you've seen here on the channel, John has maintained a much more neutral nonverbal resting state. He doesn't emote too much. However, during this little initial bit here, he does emote quite a fair bit. You see him have a little bit of a snort of derision. You see his eyes narrow a little bit. That narrowing of the eyes can be related to scorn. And he also has a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. It's not a genuine happy laughter smile. It's related to scorn. He probably finds that accusation rather ridiculous. And then as the question wraps up, you see him do a pretty substantial mouth shrug in there. That mouth shrug can be an indicator of insecurity or insincerity. It can also be related to I don't know, which falls in line with insecurity and insincerity. And then he does a pretty substantial lip compression after that, which would it be an indicator of wanting to bite back some sort of negative sentiment or emotion or words, something along those lines. So you see this whole stream of nonverbal communication from John at the very beginning here, and now we're going to hear Patsy's response.
As a woman, I am appalled that he said that. I consider Barbara Walters and Katie Couric to be one of the 2 most professional, experienced journalists in our country today.
Yeah, that's a remarkable comment. We specifically decided to go with Barbara Walters and Katie Couric because they are tops in their field and they're tough. And we didn't want to be criticized for not being challenged. They were open-ended interviews, no time limit, no restrictions. They demanded and got from us the right to ask us any question on camera that they chose to ask.
We're
That's
not
a
hiding behind
There's some indignation obviously coming from the Ramseys on this side of things. The point that they're trying to bring up is that Walters and Kirk are good and tough interviewers, which that is a mixed bag in public opinion. Some people find them to be much more soft and gentle, as even the accusations that are posed to the Ramseys here suggest. But then other people do support the Ramseys' opinion that they are very tough interviewers. And in my opinion, I have seen tougher, but I have also seen much more gentle interviewers. So to me, they're a little bit more of the middle ground. And I feel like that would have been more of an accurate statement for them to make there. But them trying to paint it out as no, we found the most difficult, hardest seasoned interviewers to go ahead and do this interview with us feels like they were kind of building up this interview in a way that it really wasn't in reality. However, throughout that non-verbally speaking, John has a consistent head shake, Patsy has a consistent head shake, but it could be heavily related to the you wouldn't believe or I find it unbelievable. So for those of you that don't know, in the American culture here, in any culture that has the up and down shake mean yes and the left and right shake mean no, desynchronization points from that can pop up if somebody is saying something that they don't believe. Say for instance, they're saying a positive, but they're doing little tiny micro shakes. No, could be a desynchronization point and vice versa as well. But it's rather overt. Both of their head shakes are rather overt, so it does fit very closely to the they wouldn't believe or you wouldn't believe in that line of thinking. Along with that, John is very intentional with his words in this. He seems to measure what he's saying before speaking. There are a few times throughout the interview that he does react emotionally, but for the most part, he tries to keep a fairly level head, which that does also kind of make sense with his background of being a CEO and his very analytical mind. So we're seeing these things already start to form as their patterns. Let's continue on through to see what else happens.
behind anyone.
And let me say one more time, we said this the last time the governor accused us of hiding behind our attorneys and PR firm. We have no PR firm. There were no attorneys present at the Barbara Walters interview or the Katie Couric interview. There are no attorneys present here today.
And no restrictions.
And no restrictions.
What do you miss most?
Okay, so throughout that, again, we're seeing John become a little bit more animated. You can see him rocking some more. He's licking his lips a fair bit more. He's more engaged with this line of thought because already it's kind of pushing against them, so they're reacting a bit emotionally to it. So even though he's trying to maintain this more collected or calm persona, you could still see some of the emotion start to slip through in various other avenues non-verbally. But he does make fairly solid points, ones that I was not able to find any evidence of the contradictory. He does not seem to have any present attorneys there or at the other two interviews that he had. He doesn't appear to be lying here, nor do his words show any form of deceit or false narrative.
Miss most about your daughter, Mrs. Ramsey?
I miss her butterfly kisses. She used to come up and give me a little brush with her eyelashes on my cheek, and her little hugs and her spontaneity.
She was a spark plug in our life. She kept the place rocking. It's a huge vacuum in our family, all of our family.
What I find fascinating by contrast with this is how Patsy and John speak about their daughter, as opposed to even how the McCanns spoke about their daughter. Patsy immediately has emotional memories of JonBenét, the butterfly kisses, and these soft, tender interactions. And John is speaking about how much energy she brought to the household and how much of a vacuum it left. Both of those are more emotional ties to the child, which is, it's a fascinating contrast, even just for me, as I've been going through multiple cases throughout the past weeks, to see how these parents react to their child either being passed or being missing and assumed that they've passed. It is an interesting contrast to be able to draw. Non-verbally speaking, again, throughout that, there's nothing that's pushing me away from the words that they're saying here. And to be frank, even if guilty, there is still the distinct possibility that those words could be genuine, that they did feel those things. It's not that a person is all bad and all good. Oftentimes there is gray, and so they could be using genuine emotion to possibly be doing not so genuine or dirty work, but there's not really enough to be able to say that here. It's just something that we want to be able to make note of, how they think of, how they process around their child. It is more tangible, and it is more of a genuine connection than what we've seen in other cases.
And there will be people who watch this and say, as you say that, we want to find the killer. They'll say, well, you are the killer.
You know,
Look, we're never going to convince cynics of the truth, so we don't try to. What we're trying to do is solicit help from the public to find this creature and to beg the Colorado officials to be at least objective and open enough to listen when that tip comes through. Then we'll find this person.
So presented with the possibility of, but some people might say that you're the killers, and that would really shorten the search for the killer. And Patsy's immediate response is to sit back and to have an increased pitch and to have a no shake in there along with a no. And then she falls apart a little bit and looks over to John for a little bit of support here. And he steps in. So that increase of pitch and the sitting back while saying no, that to me indicates perhaps a level of insecurity around that. I don't know if that would indicate insincerity in that specific instance. The vocal cords tightening with the pitch and the leaning back really does push me to feel that there's a desire to separate and some agitation during that. And then John comes in here and he's stating the things that he does. And while he's doing that, non-verbally, you could see him micro-nodding along with this. Had he been micro-no-shaking in that, then that would have been a little bit more concerning, a possibility of a desynchronization point. These micro-nods are in affirmation with what he's saying, and it's synchronized. He's not nodding and then saying things and it's all out of sync. As he's emphasizing things, you see him move his head. So that synchronization there is much more difficult to keep up if you are presenting a false narrative, if you are lying. Various nonverbal tells will slip through the cracks because it's hard to manage everything that your body does if you're trying to present a lie. That's something that you don't actually believe yourself. That's not the case here from what I can see, but let's continue on through it.
And Mrs. Ramsey, you are the one who last saw her.
yes.
In your family. The pineapple. What about the pineapple? The autopsy revealed pineapple. Did neither of you recall pineapple?
Well, I've not specifically read the autopsy report, but it is my understanding that they are not definitive about whether the substance in her digestive system was pineapple or not. All I'm saying is that I did not feed her pineapple when we returned home from the White's house. She was sound asleep. She was put in her bed and tucked in good night.
Yeah, we don't know if that's significant or not.
I do believe that it has been confirmed that it was pineapple, and that leads to some complications in the case. Because again, Burke's favorite snack, and if you've watched this channel, you've possibly seen the videos that I've done on Burke, both his adult interview and his child interview. And the pineapple factor is complicated, and one of the things that pushes me towards being suspect of Burke's involvement. And there are some other character things that go into that as well. However, as Patsy's saying this, it's fascinating her verbiage that she's choosing. She's specifically saying that she did not feed JonBenét these things, which technically might not be a lie. She might not have fed JonBenét those things, especially if Burke was having those things and JonBenét took some, causing Burke to feel angry, lash out, something along those lines, leading to everything else. That is one of the theories that has been presented and is difficult to discredit, especially with some of the evidence. Again, as with all of the rest of the theories, there's holes in it. So it is a possibility in that, but I do find it fascinating that Patsy's response here doesn't discredit that. And then along with that, after she does this whole thing, you see a shrug at the end there, which is an emphasis of I don't know, which that insecurity or insincerity at the end there as a marker is fascinating to me. She doesn't have a lot of confidence in that. Along with that, her words start to break up a little bit more as she's speaking. In other areas, she's flowed fairly smoothly. And then as she's starting to get through this, never fed anything, or things like, you start to hear those breaks and pauses in her words as she's starting to flounder a little bit. So this could be just because the question itself is implicative, it's stressful, it's anxiety inducing. So as she's trying to respond to it, her body's still going into some fight or flight, causing some issues here. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's guilt or not guilt. It's just showing that she has a reaction to it. And again, as I said, her words don't contradict other theories. It is a fascinating way that she's presented it, and now we're going to hear how John also adds to this.
Or not. All we know is what we've told the police, and that is that neither Patsy or I gave JonBenét pineapple when we got home that night. Had we been trying to hide something, it would be very easy for us to say, oh yeah, I remember I gave her pineapple before she went to bed. Next question. But that's not what happened.
He brings up a really good point there. If they wanted to hide it, it's almost easier to present partial truth, things like that. However, again, verbally speaking, he has not contradicted the concept of somebody else gave JonBenét pineapple or JonBenét took pineapple. Pineapple did exist, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understand, it was confirmed that pineapple was found in her stomach, and it is Burke's favorite snack, and Burke had some anger issues involved in that as well. So we still seem to be pushed in a direction, but there are still issues with that direction that complicate just going all in, putting all eggs into that basket. So we'll continue to build more of an opinion as we go through this.
Mrs. Ramsey, did you ever leave the house that morning?
No, I did not.
Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, the 911 call.
That seemed to be a pretty genuine response to me. The no, I looks off for a second in recollection, did not. The immediate response was a no. And as she's going through it, she hesitates to recollect and continues on with the no. Non-verbally speaking, everything flowed with that. I don't think that she left the house during that time. And judging by her nonverbal communication, that does support that. I also don't know why she would have needed to leave the house during that time. Maybe if she was involved in a cover-up to like dispose of evidence or something along those lines. I don't believe that she did that, just judging by her nonverbal communication here. Let's continue to see how she responds to this next portion of the question here.
There are contradictions about whether or not the phone was hung up and whether or not her son Burke came downstairs and was talking. Some police officers believe that they can hear that on an enhanced audio tape. Others say no. What do you say?
Well, we have not heard the 911 tape, but we understand from people who have heard it that it sounds like a bunch of chipmunks chattering and that it is almost unintelligible. All we know is that Burke did not come downstairs that morning, nor did we say to him, go back or whatever it is they say it's said on the 911 tape. I phoned the police, called 911 from the kitchen.
So as she's talking about, all that we know is that Burke did not come downstairs during that time. You start to see a little bit of activity coming onto one side of her face as she starts to seep out a small hint of contempt. Now, contempt is a feeling of moral or intellectual superiority. Basically, it means that the person who's feeling contemptuous, oftentimes they feel like they know something that the other person doesn't. And again, this could just be informationally, morally, what have you. It's that elevated above another person. So in this area, maybe Patsy's contempt is because she knows that Burke didn't come downstairs and that they didn't have to say these things. They're not wrong. It's not super high quality and it is a little messy in there. So there is still a level of interpretation that's left into there. But that level of interpretation isn't to this degree that she's saying, oh, it's just a bunch of random noises. It's just a bunch of chipmunks making noises kind of thing. It's not to that degree, but it is pretty messy. So I understand where that conflict would even have existed then, as people weren't sure whether or not that interpretation or what had been cleaned up and pulled out of that audio was genuine or not, or if it was just some of the editing had revealed sounds that didn't actually exist there. Regardless, she's starting to feel a level of contempt in regards to Burke's involvement, but that contempt doesn't necessarily mean that Burke wasn't involved. Nonverbally speaking, around that, her head is moving all around in a circle as she's emphasizing and saying you wouldn't believe or negatives in that, which then makes it very difficult as a nonverbal analyst to look at that instance and be like, oh, these are desynchronization points because there's so much movement and it's all inclusive of the various forms of thought processes that would go behind it, makes it too muddy.
One from the kitchen telephone, wall phone, hung up, dialed one set of our friends, hung up, and dialed another set of friends and asked them to come quickly to help.
How soon after that 911 call did you dial the first?
Immediately. So it seems to me like if you hang up the phone, you're not going to be able to place another call unless the phone is completely.
This is another, there's been
So with that, I do find it interesting again that Patsy starts to have verbal difficulty. Again, hesitations, pauses as she's trying to present this story, which if this is an indicator of her trying to fabricate something, then this would be 2 points of possible fabrication where she's had these verbal halts and pauses in her narrative while she's trying to present this story. So there is that possibility of that in there. Then also considering the technology at the time with the phone, the landline system, it is true that you have to hang up and all of that, but that also, her saying that doesn't mean that there wasn't a period of the phone not being on the hook. We just have to kind of take her word for it that she hung up the phone call with the emergency line and immediately started calling other friends and things. We don't know. And so there is still the distinct possibility that that had not been fully hung up. Maybe she had her phone down at her side. We don't know. And so her saying that doesn't actually clear anything up. And with her having those verbal difficulties around that, I also have some questions because 2 points now where this verbal difficulty, this verbal processing, the cadence of her words could be indicative of a false narrative that she might be presenting or insecurity, something along those lines. Let's see.
there's been no logic applied to any of this case, in my judgment. Again, if we were trying to hide something, we'd say, "Oh yeah, I remember Burke did get up and I told him to go back to bed." Next question. But the fact of the matter is that didn't happen.
They're grasping at straws instead of trying to get down to brass tacks and find this killer.
Linda, I mean, you talk about the bias we were faced with. Linda Arnott, the first detective that was there all morning, said on national television, "I saw it in John Ramsey's eyes that morning that he was the killer." Conclusion.
I understand where their frustration would be coming from if they are innocent in this situation and it's been very focused on them of being the culprits of the crime, and they're getting frustrated because it seems as though they might be ignoring other opportunities or other evidences, things like that. I do believe that the Boulder police did a pretty rough job on this case from the get-go, so I could understand where their frustration could come from. Then, along with that, John saying, like, if we wanted to hide this or cover this up, then admit that he was down here and that we sent him up, something along those lines, because then that would address the evidence in a way that could tie it off with a bow, so to speak, for our side of things. That would make sense as well. His issue with the detective who looked into his eyes and saw immediately, blah, blah, blah. I have the same issue with that detective. I saw that interview. I even spoke about it in one of my videos here. I think that would just be an absolute bullshit thing to say as a detective. You can't do that. Even with nonverbal communication training, high stakes communication training, anything along those lines, there's still no way to just glance into somebody's eyes and know anything. That doesn't exist yet. Maybe someday down the road, if we have technology that can advance in such a way that we're able to see inside a person's mind, sure, perhaps we'll be able to get to that level of detail and understanding. But until then, a statement like that is, to put it in layman's terms, stupid. It's wrong. So the fact that the detective said that, I understand again where, if innocent, the Ramseys would be a little annoyed by that. There's still quite a bit left, so we're going to go ahead and continue on.
That early.
What'd she see in your eyes?
I don't know. I think she saw shock. I think she saw the eyes of a father who had just been told his daughter was dead and she was lying in front of him. I don't know what I looked like. I'm sure I looked horrible.
Throughout that, small micro nose shakes as he's saying, "I don't know." You also see his shoulders going up and down, emphasizing the "I don't know what she saw, I don't know what I looked like." I mean, to be fair, I doubt that he was looking in a mirror to find out what he looked like. And in that point, at that state, if his daughter had indeed been found and he was not guilty of the actual death, I don't know that he would really be thinking about how he's presenting to people. He's not trying to put up some sort of mask at that time, so he might not know. If he was guilty, it would be likely that he would know how he looked. So this still adds some complexity to this, non-verbally speaking, as he's saying these things. He does break eye contact a couple times as he's looking down and to the side. Now that looking down and to the side, some people like to immediately say, oh, if they look off and to the side in some direction or another, then that means that they're remembering fake or true narratives and whatnot, and that sort of directional IQ is not a universal experience that can be applied to everyone. It can be applied to people on a person-to-person basis, but you have to establish that baseline with them, how they do interact with their fields of vision during recollection. And since we haven't done that to John, we can't look at him looking down into the side and be like, oh, he's lying or anything along those lines. However, what has been shown is that when people do recollect something, the likelihood of them breaking eye contact, perhaps narrowing their eyes, it goes up dramatically during genuine recollection. And so that actually, to me, pushes for his authenticity as he's trying to recollect what he could have possibly looked like during this scenario. And then it's emphasized, like I said, with the shoulder shrugs and micro nose shakes in there. To me, that seemed like a synchronized response. Yeah, I don't know. I disagree with the detective's little look in the eye concept thing. And I happen to believe John at that point. Let's keep watching.
One of the most unusual parts of this has been this ransom note. You know that you've seen it several times, but would you go over it with us and tell us what you know and what you've been told about it?
Well, first of all, this is what is going to help us convict the killer. This is 3 pages of handwritten writing samples of the killer. We've been told by experts that if we have a suspect and we get sufficient samples of his writing, they will be able to tell conclusively with this much of a sample that the person wrote that note. So this is
I'm having some difficulty here. Not only one, because that I don't believe that that's actually the case. I don't believe that anybody can be fully claimed as guilty from something because handwriting is similar or seems to match. It can definitely be strong evidence towards it. And even along that line, which this interview will address it soon, Patsy's own handwriting had some pretty substantial matching points in the letter as opposed to how she wrote normally. I think that the evidence could be indicative of a party or not, but I don't think that it could be fully incriminating as John is trying to put it out to be. And so with that, I have that question in my mind of how come there's so much confidence on the handwriting side of things? And John himself even shifted from that as time went on. Now, as you even heard earlier, he's shifted more towards, oh, it's going to be centered around the DNA and not so much this handwriting. And then you also see him have a pretty quick manipulator up there as he's speaking in that as well, which these manipulators around the mouth touching like this, can be an indicator of what's called mouth blocking gestures. And those can be because a person doesn't want to say a thing or they know they're saying something that they shouldn't say. This would be in regards to perhaps a lie. It could be in regards to like a secret that they shouldn't have said or told, something along those lines. You'll see that coming in. And the way that this is presented, at least in the studies that I have found, is that it goes back to even as we're children, as you make a noise or you're crying or something along those lines, oftentimes you'll be told to shh. And that same sort of mindset goes in throughout adulthood as you're saying things or making noises that you shouldn't. The urge to block your mouth will come in. So there's that possibility that's coming in there. Other people could look at that and be like, oh, he's rubbing his nose, and that could be a part of the Pinocchio effect, which is yet another thing that is not proven universally. The Pinocchio effect cannot apply to every person that you meet. And the concept of it is that as you're lying, your heart rate increases, which will cause blood to rush to your face and your nose. Then it will cause it to itch. It can be perhaps done on an individual basis. Again, if you establish their baseline, do they do that in other areas? That could be an indicator then. But it's not universal, and I have not been able to see that established with John, especially from any other external source other than myself. So still complex there, but I cannot rely on those sorts of tells to be able to say deceitful or not.
So this is a huge clue. Why it was left, I don't know.
And let me just interject at this point. Mrs. Ramsey, it's my understanding that the Colorado Bureau of Investigation took your handwriting samples to the Secret Service. Do you know the results of that test? Definitively?
No, I don't.
I find that interesting. I hadn't noticed this before. When speaking about the Secret Service, I had always seen the leaning in and the narrowing of the eyes, which that intensity can crop up in times of scrutiny. It can be based off of scorn. But then what I also see is I lightly saw her jaw tense in that as well, which that would be further towards that aggression side of agitation. So the narrowing of the eyes and the lightly tightening of the jaw, perhaps there's some frustration or aggression in there that maybe Patsy didn't know that it had been brought up and that rubbed her the wrong way, something along those lines. Just saw that come through here, and that's fascinating to me. Why would that aggression, why would that frustration be creeping in if there was nothing complicit about that? If there was nothing wrong with her handwriting, why would that be? Why would that evoke that sort of emotion? It's fascinating. It's definitely something to think about as we continue on.
No, we had experts do the same kind of testing, and it's my understanding that the people that we use trained the people from the CBI, Colorado Bureau, that administered the tests. And they, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being absolutely no match, I ranked at a 4.5, with 1 being perfect match. So
Just to rephrase how she's saying this, basically she said, we hired some people and they said that I basically didn't match. And from my understanding, they taught the people that said that I did possibly match. So I'm going to go with the people that we hired instead, which to me is just kind of admitting that they wanted to go for a more biased approach than the one that was more universal. I understand why they would want to maybe go with their own personal side of things, especially if the Boulder police had any influence in this, which they did have a fair amount. And the Boulder police did a pretty bang up job of the handling of this case to begin with. So I can understand why they have a proclivity towards their personal investigators rather than the state provided ones. Again, it still just kind of admits that they're tending towards a biased response rather than a possibly unbiased response. Just more data as we're going through.
Yeah, we don't know the results of the police testing. We've heard that they're at best inconclusive.
How do we know that it's just because you don't like the outcome of what Boulder police have decided, that you're under an umbrella of suspicion, that you just want another?
They can investigate us. If the governor would put together a seasoned investigative team to start over, go back through all the leads, all the evidence, we'd be fully cooperative. And they can investigate us again if they want. That's fine. But please don't.
Okay. During this time, they can investigate us. You hear that pitch creep up a little bit and you hear the force behind the words fall off a bit. They can investigate us. And so that lack of force kind of pushes a bit towards maybe a lack of confidence for me. And along with that, we're seeing a pretty substantial no shake. To me, that I have some difficulties with that specific nonverbal cluster because of what the nonverbal side says as opposed to what he's saying verbally. I don't necessarily buy that they were super willing for that investigation to be pointed back towards them. And then sure enough, verbally after that, he does say, with some qualifications here, with some parameters, we'd be okay with that. And then even adds beyond that, that we just hope that it doesn't mean that we're turning away attention from other places that we should be looking. So he has some qualifiers, and then he has some nonverbal disconnect from what he's saying verbally. To me, it's enough of a red flag that I want to be able to make note of that as I'm continuing forward, and remember that he does have at least some contention with just whoever investigating them. It is something to make note of as we're continuing.
Don't just investigate us, because if you do, we're never going to find the killer.
there is lots of evidence. There is a lot of evidence.
The Boulder police did a wonderful job of collecting evidence. Thank goodness.
And that doesn't change. Evidence is evidence. We've got it.
We've got
We need
DNA
to
that hasn't been
follow the
identified.
evidence and do some follow-up investigating, not just dead end with John and Patsy Ramsey.
I was perplexed at why 118,000. Why not $1 million? I mean, why not? If this, but there's only this madman knows why.
And of course, the supposition was that was the amount of your bonus.
That was a supposition I put forward early on as I look back to try to figure out what that number meant. I offered that up to the police and said this possibly could be the case. I don't know that it was. Who knows? I mean, only the killer.
Fascinating on this point. To offer such a thing like that, for John to say, no, this number that's on this ransom note, this is close to what my bonus was. That would be a rather stupid move to do if you were guilty or complicit in the crime, is to offer evidence that points towards a very specific knowledge. To me, either one, John is innocent and he just wanted to offer this, Or 2, he's guilty and he's stupid. Or 3, he's guilty and he's pretty smart. Because then offering that, please look at this area, this could be a tie here, offering those extra eyes pointed towards himself would be seen as a pretty risky move. But it could be a point of rather intelligent manipulation to say, no, please go ahead and look at me. I have no issues with you looking and investigating me. Here's something that I can even give you to start looking. It could be a manipulation point to add a bluff instead of being like, please don't look at that. Don't look at anything. Don't look at my evidences. Don't look at my numbers. Don't look at anything. I do not believe that John's stupid. So if he did do this crime, if he was complicit in any way, I don't think that he would be just stupidly offering evidence that would incriminate him. If anything, he would be doing something more like this more high-level manipulation. It's just a really fascinating thing that he's just admitted here that he brought that forward. It's definitely something to add for food for thought.
Only the killer knows, and this is a deranged individual.
What eliminates you as suspects?
I don't know if anything eliminates us. I don't know that we'll ever be able to prove our innocence. First of all, we shouldn't have to prove our innocence. One of the things we've lost in this society, I believe, is the presumption of innocence. We've been told by the police, prove to us you're innocent, and we'll be the first to say it. And we were aghast at that kind of a statement.
Mrs. Ramsey,
That's true. That guilty until proven innocent mindset can be very dangerous as well, because it can very quickly lead to very many false convictions of things. So I agree with him on that front, that there might not ever be anything that they could say or do that will prove their innocence to people, but also it shouldn't really be on the burden. It shouldn't be their burden to do so. It should be on the burden of the investigators to prove their guilt. So he has some standing to be able to work with on that. It seems as though he has very meticulously thought this case through and through, which would make sense as the father of the child who is murdered, innocent or guilty. Both sides, that would make sense why he would want to know and understand and think through all of these different things. Something else that I wanted to make note of verbally that he does here is that he has painted out the person that did this as deranged, as insane, as you can't anticipate, and only they know, and things like that, which could be true. That absolutely could be true, but then it could also be throwing out red herrings of, let's just not try to find a pattern for this because there's no need to. There's no way that we can. This person's insane. We'll never find the pattern for it, so don't even really bother looking for the pattern. And that could be him trying to redirect attention, especially if it was something like Burke did something and then the parents had to cover it up in some sort of way and that went awry, something along those lines. Could also just be that he does indeed feel that the person who did something so terrible like this, if it was intentional, if it was premeditated, they would be definitely psychologically troubled, to put it lightly. So I get where he's coming from on that. Anyways.
Mrs. Ramsey, if you thought your husband had killed your daughter, finish that sentence.
We wouldn't be sitting here having this interview right now. He would be behind bars.
Mr. Ramsey?
The police asked that question of me.
Okay. So with Patsy's response, she has this head tilt and neck exposure here, and that's a confidence thing. That's something to where you don't see that coming out unless a person is trying to show that they're feeling confident and invulnerable in an area, because this is a vulnerable area of your body, as I've even talked about in many, many videos in the past. When you start to see somebody feeling defensive and insecure about something, it's much more likely to see them start to hunch in and tuck in as they protect these vulnerable areas. As they feel like they're not at a vulnerable state or they're feeling overly confident, then that will start to creep in there. What I notice verbally with her cadence is that it has a little bit of a lilt to it that does not match how she has naturally spoken throughout the rest of this interview. And so to me, it feels like it might be a little bit performative. And that performative side of things could also then add context to this exposing of the vulnerable areas, as perhaps that entire response could be a show. There's not enough evidence here to be able to say that that's the case. It is definitely something to keep in mind that this response, that could be faked. That also being said, verbally speaking, to so quickly say, oh, he would just be behind bars. If he was the killer, it's where he would go. And now it's turned to John, and instead of John just so promptly saying the same thing, he starts to add some more information around it, which, fascinating why he's doing that. It could even be straying into packing a narrative, which people oftentimes will do when they're nervous. This can be caused by trying to push a false narrative, can make somebody nervous, overly pack a narrative. We'll see.
They said, hypothetically, if Patsy did it or you thought she did it, would you turn her in? And I had to think about it because I was like, I never even thought about that.
Interesting. So hypothetically, if she did this, and I had to think about it, hadn't even considered that. I kind of get where he's saying it's not something that I would hope any spouse or parent, co-parent would immediately leap to the conclusion of my other parent half has done this terrible thing. So I kind of get that, but it's important to note that he just said that he had to think about it. He had to consider what he would do. Now let's listen to what he says next.
Because I tried to give him a thoughtful answer, and I thought, and I said, yes, I would. Absolutely.
You turn her in?
Yes. Without question.
Just very briefly.
Okay, so he said he had to think about it, and then he said yes without question, which contradicts what he was saying before. Along with that, as he's saying, or you would, as the interviewer reemphasizes, you would do that. He says yes, and he does a little nose shake and breaks his eye off to the side there. Now that little micro nose shake doesn't fall in line with yes. It's not yes, it's yes. And so there is that difference there. It is a micro movement. He does break eye contact during that time. Not necessarily certain on that, which then would beg into question, if they were both complicit in this, maybe John's not comfortable saying that he would also want to incriminate his wife. And if we look back at Patsy's response with how she was trying to perhaps overly perform her response, to me, the two together, it does strike me as at least somewhat suspicious. I don't know that either of them were at each other's throats or are ready to throw the other in jail for any sort of reason. And that can be seen as good if they're innocent. It could also be seen as, well, maybe they are both not innocent. And neither of them are comfortable trying to throw the other under the bus, because inevitably that would then drag the other one. Definitely things to be able to still think about.
Just very briefly, if we could talk about the stun gun and the possibility of exhumation. And you said you did not want to do that because?
Well, it was brought up early on when we learned that a stun gun was involved, and
really massive manipulator up here to his eye during the mentioning of the exhumation. That sort of blocking gesture and manipulator could be seen as an indicator of some form of discomfort with what's being said, but he does continue to itch his eye pretty prolonged there. It's not something that's just a quick sort of touch in. It seems as though he has an itch there. Now the question is that itch there because of some sort of psychological processing that's just made his limbic system start to fire off a little bit more, so he has to self-soothe? Or is it just because he had an itch? Difficult to say. I just wanted to make note that did pop up there. There's just not enough verbally around it to say that it was linked to anything, and there wasn't enough non-verbally to add context to it being some form of heavy an indicator of deceit or guilt or discomfort. Let's continue watching.
I was asked by our investigators, they said if this needs to be done fairly soon, or the opportunity to do so will be gone, it would be possibly helpful, possibly not. And I just could not bring myself to say, yeah, let's do that. I mean, my child was at rest. She was at peace. We'd laid her to rest. And I couldn't bear the thought of that.
Even if it meant helping to find the killer.
I wasn't convinced that it was conclusively going to help.
They have photographs.
Verbally, his response, it makes sense verbally. Non-verbally speaking, the tone of his voice is interestingly low and soft here. He's had more dynamic and more force and projection throughout the rest of this interview, and then in this portion, One, he starts to have his cadence break up a fair bit and some more ums and uhs, a lot of looking down, and then we're hearing very, very soft, low tones in there as well. So to me, those soft, low tones, the breaking of eye contact, the much more difficult time keeping a cadence, the filler words, it's a huge pop of nonverbal communication from his baseline there. It's strayed pretty dramatically. Now, the looking down and to the side, that's commonly related to shame or guilt. It's difficult to say which one. It could be shame that he turned down an evidence avenue that could have been very useful, and then they still haven't solved the case. So maybe he's feeling shame and guilt around that. It could also be that he's feeling perhaps nervous or afraid, and instead of increasing in pitch and seeing agitation come in, he's locking in and he's trying to shut down. So instead of being more overt and verbose with his nonverbal and verbal communication, he's now closing in and shutting down some. Both of those are possibilities. In context with the other sides of things, I'm more leaning towards him feeling a level of shame centered around not offering up this possible avenue of evidence that could have added a solution or a resolution to the case. Both are possibilities, and that's the direction that I'm being pushed. Let's continue.
Photographs. They have
experts that have said
enough
this
that
is
they
very,
know.
very compelling. Dr. Doberson, I think in Colorado, who's a leading expert on stun gun wounds, has viewed this and said it's very compelling.
What's the most important question anyone?
Very compelling expert says from pictures that it looks like a stun gun, which it does line up fairly decently with marks that could be made by a stun gun, even down to some of the hemorrhaging around the actual wounds themselves. It does seem to line up fairly well. That also being said, it's only one person, one expert's opinion that they're relying on here, that it's very compelling. And even that very compelling does not mean that it is genuinely from a stun gun. Again, this is now working off of a supposition rather than an actual fact. Had they actually gone through the process that they had requested from John, perhaps it could have been boiled down to a fact rather than just an expert's opinion on the matter. Perhaps that's also what's adding to this shame or guilt that John's feeling at the time, is that because of his decision, a concrete answer was not reached that could have possibly been reached. Interesting to think about.
The most important question anyone can ask you that would prove your innocence, help people open their minds? Is there any question that can be asked?
Well, again, we shouldn't have to prove our innocence, but we've been cast that lot. Why do you think we killed our daughter? Tell me why. Tell me what we've done, what evidence you have, other than we were asleep in the home that night. There is no other evidence. There is no other reason.
Fascinating. That's not the case. That wasn't the case then. Again, people were suspect of Burke having an outburst. And so with John even willingly turning attention away of like, there's no other conceivable reason that we would have done something like this, again, which just completely discounts and subverts Burke's possible involvement. And that actually characterizes again and again in every interview that I have ever seen John and Patsy do. They do everything in their capabilities to not speak about Burke's possible involvement. Anytime it's brought up, they could try to quickly answer it and steer off to the side. And that would make absolute sense if there was an accidental act of rage from Burke. Burke did something and they had to do something to cover it up. Because why would they want to do that to their kid? Why would they want to do something? They've just lost one kid. Why would they want to possibly lose another child? If that's the case, then this is an actual nightmare scenario for the Ramsey family. If it's not something twisted, it's not something, for instance, some of the theories about like a pedophilic ring or some sexual abuse from John to JonBenét, things along those lines. If it's not something like that and it's something based out of an accident, especially something based out of an accident between their kids, what a nightmare. What an awful time. And yes, they would be guilty. They would be guilty of covering up a murder. They would be guilty of a myriad of things. but not because they were evil, not because they were wanting to cause damage or harm or anything along those lines, because they were trying to prevent more from being done. And that's still, it feels like where I'm being pushed to. That's the thing that seems to fit a lot of the different evidences. But again, there are still things that just don't make sense. The garrote and the stun gun wounds, those don't seem to fall in line. It seems like it would be very overt overkill for a cover-up. I'm still being pushed in all sorts of different directions, and maybe someday that there will be some sort of resolution, there will be an advancement in technology, there will be something that can be done, but right now it's so muddy and it's so messy. If you have another opinion, or if there's some evidences that I have not covered here that you think might add some more clarity for either myself or the people watching, that might help other people develop opinions and myself develop a better opinion, then let me know in the comments below. If you have any other questions or requests for other cases or drama scenarios online or TV shows or whatever that you would like me to do an analysis style thing on, let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, hit subscribe, hit the like button, blah, blah, blah. You know all those things. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for the day. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome, as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.